Bonjour.
Good afternoon. Thank you to François Langlais for this introduction, which was really very interesting. We're really delighted to be with you this afternoon for this first session, which we have called Information, the Clash of Narratives. I'll be moderating this session, and I am a journalist and editor-in-chief of Correspondance de la Presse. So we have with us today Melissa Bell, who's a senior international correspondent for CNN. Then to her left there is David LARRAMENDY, who is chairman of the executive board of the M6 group. Then to his left we have Pierre, who is chief executive officer of the Les Echos Le Parisien group and also president of the Alliance, the General Press Alliance. Then there's Stanislas NIOX CHATEAU, who's the chairman and chief executive officer of Doctolib. And then we have Tidar Vald, who is director for partnerships and government affairs for the International Fund for Public Interest Media. Ladies and gentlemen, I will pass over to you very quickly, but first of all, Anne Perrault, who's a member of the Circle of the Economists, is going to introduce this session by presenting the key issues around this question. So over to you, Anne. Thank you, Tanguy. So the Clash of Narratives is the title, which takes us to the instrumentalization of information and of news, which of course takes us back to the first session. This has been a phenomenon since the beginning of the press. It's always a question of what are we talking about and who's speaking, but this question is back on the agenda because, well, it's the economy, stupid. And that makes sense at this event, of course. The information that we receive and the way that the news and the media work has changed significantly over the last 15 years. The way that news is brought to us through Google Discover, other platforms, gives us a succession of articles with a few lines. Sometimes there are videos, even when these are press videos, and consumers like this. You can see the success of TikTok, and consumers are really massively and in the vast majority very satisfied with this because they can just read this on their way to work, and so they've stopped signing up and buying the press. They've stopped also looking, they've also stopped watching television in a standard traditional way. So this has, of course, caused great upheaval in the media, and that's why it's important to understand this in order to understand the situation the media are currently in today. Media are platforms that bring together audiences which pay often for the content from the press or from television. And then there are also advertisers. And so you can see that the drop-off in this standard two-way approach has caused a change because the advertisers are investing less in traditional media, and now they're investing in digital platforms. Sometimes this is more sometimes in the same platforms, but sometimes completely elsewhere. So that means there has been a drop-off in revenue for most media change. There are some exceptions, but that's a key aspect. There's a second aspect which is leading to a drop-off in revenue. Google and Facebook, who are the key players in digital advertising, they've integrated a whole number of functions called ad tech functions. And so this means that a whole number of people the Facebook and Google are capturing increasing levels of revenue through these platforms. So this means that advertisers are investing less in media, but even when they are investing in media, an increasing amount of the investment is going to Google and Facebook. So there's this very significant drop-off in revenue is the first layer of the challenges for media, and the second level of the problem is linked into our discussion today, is that the traditional media are being challenged by other forms of news, or maybe kinds of news. So we could talk about, in France, brut or Hugo Decrypt, which are a style of providing news which is relevant perhaps and of particular interest to the younger generations. But there are also on the market people that present themselves as being people who are providing news but are actually influencers and are getting a lot of attention. And this is a problem because influencers are playing a great deal on the fact that platforms appreciate content that brings together listeners and a wide audience because of advertising. But what people in their vast majority like is emotional content rather than information content. Emotional content creates a polarization in audiences because either you're for something or against something. And this takes us back to the previous roundtable panel session that we just heard, where there's not a lot of rational thought in terms of the emotional presentation given by these influencers. So in these conditions, how can we ensure that news is provided by professionals, people whose profession it is to produce news that is checked and that is rational? So we're talking here about journalists primarily, journalists who have this desire to be objective, to check the truth of facts and to ensure that something is real. And that's what we're going to be looking at in this panel session. Thank you very much, Anne. Yes, we're going to go right into this now. You were talking about journalists, you were talking about new forms of information. So, Melissa, you are the only journalist on this panel. How do you, as a journalist, perceive this competition, this new competition? For you, the changes in terms of strategy, etc., really for my bosses. It's really, they're asking about the strategic questions. For us on the ground as journalists, it's more about change in terms of a change towards digital media, which has been a really significant challenge for us, we're still the leading source of news in the world, but we're facing a lot of competition, as you've been saying, from influencers and from other forms of journalism and connections with the audiences. So I was thinking about Hugo Decrypt that you've mentioned and what our role is in all of this. So in a world where we're facing a lot of news that's not been checked, subjective or emotional information, how can we continue to explain that the verification system that we have in legacy media outlets, that these systems have an important role, that it's important to go and get facts and to check them in order to present them as facts? But how do we do that while also using the new ways of doing things? So you were saying that we're losing this traditional way of watching television. Since the creation of CNN 45 years ago, that's been the way that we've worked. And the challenge for us is to change this big ship around so that we have a different way of doing things while maintaining the credibility of our brand and the credibility of the images. What I can see today is that a lot of media really are not worried about the quality of image anymore on these questions. If we're thinking about these vertical videos, that changes the way that we work on the ground, because we're not just doing television now or articles for the written press. Now we're filming everything that we do, every mission that we're given. Whenever on the ground, we use our telephones to film sort of vertical images, which requires a fresh creativity from us. It creates a new kind of link between audiences and journalists. People used to just see images on the television, so this is a challenge, but it's also a new way of approaching news, which is actually really quite interesting for us once we're on the ground. But it's true that it's a significant challenge, and I don't think anyone has really found the solution to move from one phase to another. Do we need less or more people on the ground? Melissa says, we need more people on the ground and less people in offices, but that costs a lot of money. The problem is sending camera teams and reporters to the ground, on the ground, getting them involved. That costs a lot of money. It requires us to think a lot about how all of this is monetized as television is slowly being pushed to one side. Thank you, Melissa. You were talking about your bosses. You were saying that it's the editors, it's they who are faced really with this issue directly. David, how does this radical change in approach to news, how does this impact your industry as a TV channel boss? First of all, before responding to that, Anne, you were saying this clash of narratives has always existed. When Napoleon had his journal for the Great Army and other initiatives, they had the idea was to impose his narrative. So this is something that's always existed. But however, today we have two things coming together which create this new world. So technology, and we'll come back to this because this plays a key and fundamental role, and there's also a fragmentation in most of our societies, at least in our Western societies. We have groups, we have different groups in our societies whose centers of interest are moving away from one another. So, of course, these new technologies have really changed our lives. Stanislas will, of course, talk to us about this later, I think, but it's not just been an advantage, not just been a benefit. So, in terms of one-to-one advertising in commerce is really very effective, and it's also very effective in news, but that's not necessarily a good thing. When you look at the social media, you've got this confirmation this confirmation bias, which means that you tend to listen to things which you generally agree with. So it helps people to think that there are a lot of people that think like them, or people listen to the same music or have the same political perspectives, and it means that more and more we are surrounding ourselves with people who think in exactly the same way as us. That creates more and more islands, and it intensifies this movement of opposition against each other. It brutalizes our relationships and amplifies that. So I would say that it's obviously really become very complex for us. Fake news, which is developing very rapidly, they have really accelerated. That has really accelerated this phenomena. Our objective on M6 is that we're seeking to reach everybody. We're seeking to reach the general public, and it seems like accessing the world has never been as easy. It's so easy to find information about any subject. We could talk about how to there may not be the solution for reducing a temperature in a big room like this, but we can get information about anything. But at the same time, it's almost like the horizon of perspective has been reduced. Fake news is increasingly growing, it's becoming more sophisticated, it's operating at a more industrial level. I think at the most recent presidential elections, I think there were more than 1,300 fake news articles that were produced with these publications with names that seemed reasonable. The Grand Canyon Journal, for example, and this produced a whole number of fake news articles from false publications that were just having a negative impact, and it's going to continue to have a negative impact in the years to come. What should we do? There are at least three things we should do. First of all, we need to put money back into news. That's absolutely essential. We believe in news. We believe in what our 300 journalists in the M6 group are doing on the ground. We believe in journalism. We believe in journalism on the ground. Going to get that information, checking that information. We believe in journalism news, not algorithm news. And of course, that's something that we need to continue to really emphasize. And that's the second point, is that we really need to train people in this world of images where the difference between reality and illusion has become almost invisible. We need to teach people from the youngest ages in school and later on in life to check, to ask for sources, to double check, to do this journalism work. That's really going to become fundamental. And the third aspect, and I'll wrap up with this, is that we need to really, authorities, economic players, political players need to really understand that this is first of all, an economic battle, an economic clash between the United States and China. We used to be ahead in this world, and now we're behind. We really have no place in this environment. You need to know that 92% of the data of Europeans is stored in U.S. Databases. We need to bring an end to our naivety. We need to understand that this is a technological war. Europe as a continent needs to stand up and move forward here. Thank you, David. You were saying it's an economic war. We have a former auditor of accounts from the French Court of Auditors here. Pierre, how do you see the economic role in the media over the last 20 years? Well, first of all, I just want to say I totally agree with everything that's been said just before. I wanted to talk a bit about the journey of written press publications and what we need to do in order to make sure this journey continues well beyond. So we've often talked about a journey, and I think this term is a good way of summarizing this whole story. We are doing a journey from Gutenberg to Zuckerberg. That's a good way of summarizing it. So we had the press with these huge printing presses, and we have digitized a great deal of our activities. So we've got this journey that we're on with some very clear convictions that we need people on the ground. We need to go and get the news. I used to be CEO of the AFP, and we were constantly checking this kind of information. I know this is the case with other agencies. We need to go and get this information. We need not to ask robots to do it. We need people who understand news to go and get the information. So that's not going to change. But what is going to change in the journey, and this was mentioned, is the very idea of truth. It was said last century, at the end of the 20th century, that truth will be, and facts rather, will become an object of debate. And we've seen that. We've seen, thanks to the creativity of our friends over the Atlantic, this idea of alternative facts or counterfacts, or this idea of facts that are opposed to a truth that we don't want to recognize. So this is something we saw coming, but it's a change in our journey, and this journey which is taking us to the digital world. We have this capacity to produce and to multiply all this fake information, as you were saying earlier, in a way that brings people who think the same way together. It's totally the opposite of what democracy is. We are strengthened by the opinions of people who have the same opinions as us, and this is a really very complex journey. You asked me to talk about the economic aspect. What we are finding is that we're losing people who are buying newspapers in a newspaper kiosk. When you have the opportunity, I would really invite you to go and buy a newspaper from a newspaper kiosk. In the Paris region, there are 1,000 of these kiosks closing every year, so there are less and less of them. If you have you need 3 or 4 digital subscribers to replace a paper subscriber. That's another economic issue. So the economic paradigms are really very challenging. And then another thing which has really changed in our economy is the intermediation that we are now subjected to. In digital technology, we could talk about CNN, it's the same issue. In digital news, about 70% of our traffic, people who come and visitors don't go directly to our address. They don't type in Écho de Parisien. They go through a search engine, which is sent through. So before we had this direct information, we sold papers directly. We had a direct relationship, and in this economy of relationship, which is what has become the key focus today with a whole number of different platforms. So actually we've been disconnected from our customers. And so we're more and more in the hand of intermediaries. 2 days ago, I was reading an article about the development of traffic on big websites in America. From 1 year to another, we've got about 29% drop-off for the Washington Post, 24% for CNN.com. There's massive drops in traffic. And so you just ask yourself, well, what are we doing differently? Well, actually, no, we've not changed anything. We're still doing our job. We have 720 journalists who work with us, and they're not going to change the way they work, but what they're finding is that they're losing traffic, and so we see this traffic dropping off, and so we can see this economic dependency that Anne described and has described in her work on competition law. So we are in the hands of those who are providing us with the traffic, and that means, in terms of economics, that means it's the same search engines that collect our data to make models of us, and it's also those search engines that are going to reference us. But we can't say to them, stop collecting our data, because then we will no longer be listed in the search engine results. So there's a whole number of obstacles in front of us in the digital world, and there's a whole number of rules of the game to reinvent. And just to be a bit positive, a number of us have shareholders who are backing us, who have a long-term perspective. They believe in what we're doing. They think it's important to keep investing in this activity. They really believe in this democratic foundation of providing citizens with verified information. And we're going to continue to fund this journey, but nothing that we're constantly facing new challenges. Every week, every month, we have a new player that comes into the market who says what you've been doing has been really good. What we're going to do is collect what you do, and then we're going to monetize it and send it to other people. And we have this feeling that it's just really weird, taking something from other people and selling it. That has a name, which I won't say, but that's not a good thing. Thank you very much, Pierre. I think people appreciate what you've just said. You've talked about this technological war. You've talked about platforms. So, Stanislas, everyone is turning to you. It might not be easy, perhaps, to people to understand why Doctolib is here, because when we were preparing this interview, actually we realized that Doctolib has a lot of content. So Doctolib is a platform that provides connections with doctors and appointments with doctors. So I'm really delighted to be here and just have another perspective on fake information around health. It's been said here, but fake news around health is not a minor phenomenon, but it's a major public health issue. Why? Well, because, as you know, needs in terms of health have significantly increased. About a third of our population face chronic illnesses. I don't know if you know this, but 10% of Google's searches in the world are focused on health. 15% of questions to ChatGPT are healthcare-linked questions. But at the same time, every 5 years, there is twice the amount of medical information that is published. Every 2 months, twice the amount of information is being published. Well, this is amazing. Patients can be autonomous. They can be experts. There's so much medical information. There are bodies that check this information. This is a wonderful thing. It's going to allow us all to be in better health. But there are two problems with this, and this has been said already. 40% of information about health on social media are false. The problem is that the algorithms of the major platforms in this world are promoting engagement. They're promoting simplicity as opposed to the veracity of facts. And in the scientific world, this creates a significant issue around health. This means today in the world there are children who are not being vaccinated. There's twice as much vaccination phobia over the last 10 years in France. We are the European country that vaccinates people the least in Europe. 30% of French patients have stopped a treatment because of information they saw on social media. This means that people are getting information from ChatGPT and Google, but they're also treating themselves, and they're making irreversible decisions about their health. So yes, I think there is a war. I think we need to get control back of information, in particular of health information, and we have a role to play. As public authorities, as health authorities, as French, European digital companies, we need to take back control of medical knowledge so that European patients, we can all have access to information that has been checked and the sources have been checked so that we can have access to medical knowledge that is checked. You talked about AI, but it's true that AI changes the landscape again about the way in which we consume information. The question about how these AI models are trained is the information that comes from Gemini, from Mistral. Are these models trained on medical data that has been checked? Are they assessed in terms of checked medical protocols? At this time when there is a massive consumption of these agents, I think that in France we have a responsibility to take back control of healthcare information.
So that we communicate to the patients and to the caregivers. And is this too late to do that? No, it's not too late to do that. The AI revolution is happening now. For once, where we have one of the first technologies in the health sector in terms of practitioners and patients. Do I drop down the guard in front of Google and Apple? No. Do we all need to work together? All the people in the specialties, patients, caregivers, practitioners, to get back the control on the information on the health data? Yes, I think we could do it, because algorithm and the veracity and the algorithm will never, and the information will never replace the veracity of facts in the health sector as any other. Thank you very much, Stanislas. We're going to conclude this first roundtable now with you're bringing an international focus, because I believe that the International Fund for Public Interest Media operates in 30 countries. Can you present to us what this fund is about and how you see things, maybe by bringing us some concrete examples to the table? Thank you. I'd like to echo what Anne said at the beginning. There's no much more publications. There's no more advertising. So we're looking at a phenomenon. David mentioned it. The kiosks were closing down. Pierre, sorry. But also the press sector is closing down. There's some independent media in the country, particularly in the global south. They close every month. So we've created the Fund for Public Interest Media. It's a fund that invests in independent media in countries such as Moldavia, Ukraine, Armenia, Georgia, because in those countries, since there's no more advertising, there's no more readers, and the media are closing because there's no more money coming in. And what happens? Well, some autocratic regimes, as you all know, are invading the market with fake news, with their own media. We talked about the Herald, there's the Boston Times. Who've heard about Boston Times? Boston Times, once more, is a fake media that was created by Russians, but the name sounds like a media that you would know. And throughout these media, we're trying to contact the audience and to be an intermediary to give them some fake information. The problem is particularly difficult in countries such as Moldavia or Ukraine, Georgia. Moldavia, for example, is a very small country. The population is about the same than the size of Aix and Marseille metropolis, and they managed to spend 100 million euros for the last elections in fraud, in media, in fake news, to try to stop the pro-European dynamic. And so in our fund, we financed some Moldavian independent media who came on the ground, as Melissa Bell was saying, to do investigation, to film things, and to show what Russia was capable to do to block public opinion and to make, of course, the pro-Russian candidate win the election. So it was the candidate, the pro-European who finally won these elections. But we're looking at a dynamic that if we don't back the independent media in these countries, they're going to die, and we're going to be faced to not an economic war, but with the war closer to our borders, as we already see in Ukraine. Thank you very much, Tidar. Thank you for this first roundtable. I think you're setting a good landscape. I would like to go back to what Stanislas said. Is it too late? Can we take back the control on it from an economic point of view? Can we restore an economic model that is sustainable for media, for traditional media, the media that you have, Pierre and David? David? We were a little less impacted or later than the press, but we're in the middle of it now. The time of people watching traditional TV is dropping, so we want to put our focus on digital and keep the investment in programs. We believe in the raw material of what we're doing, so we're trying to invest in programs at the M6 group. There's about 500 million every year that is spent for that. And second, we want to invest in the digital sector with a platform that is called M6 Plus, with an audio side on RTL, the French radio station. Why is it fundamental? Because we moved from a society with this public space is shrinking. So to find some good programs so that every night would group 3, 4, 5, 6 million people is very rare. It exists. It's a case for sports, for some of our major brands, but it's very difficult. So we need to keep investing in what we're doing, and at the same time investing in digital that will allow us to reach out to smaller or more niche populations who will be after more specialized programs. Are we going to get there? I don't know. Are we mobilized in doing it? Yes. And we're still investing in programs. And are we faced with competitors, American platforms, with whom we're fighting on equal terms? No. We have an admin framework, of a regulatory framework that was built in the 80s that hasn't really evolved. And the world has evolved, and we're still, I could talk about it for hours, but I think I would bore a lot of people if I did. We have an answer of a political answer, and there's a gap between the timing of technology, the timing of business that is faster and faster, and a regulatory framework that is not evolving at all. Pierre, to restore the economic model for media. What is your take on it? I completely agree on the timing aspect of it. I have an example in mind. It took 16 years or 17 years to the European Commission to do a summit on digital after Google emerged. Google was already 16 or 17 years old, and there was never a summit held on the digital industry and sector. It means that the awareness of what digital brought to the world every day in our our everyday life, in every side of its economic sector, is huge. So we're in the middle of this press that is in the middle of big revolutions and changes. We're really convinced of it, of the freedom of the press. Otherwise, we'd not do this job. It's a tough job. And when we think that we've solved one problem, there's a new coming our way. So we've all said it. It's part of these narratives. It is really aligned with democracy. It is linked with the democratic foundation. An American survey showed that when the local newspapers disappear, the likelihood of people going to vote also drops, because they don't have a local newspaper, and it doesn't feel like the national newspaper talk about their reality, and that's why they don't feel so involved in the elections. So we really need to fight for that. The models that we keep are the models to adopt. We want to adopt even the finest technologies. We try to be up to the challenges we're facing in les Échos. We have many people who do tech, developers, all these jobs. We have integrated them, and we're trying to present ourselves as a media library, because if we don't have the right tech, we're not going to find the right audience. We're not going to go how to address them, how to reach out to them. We want to be able to analyze the profile of a customer who maybe would register to our newspaper, would subscribe. Subscriptions are key. How many subscriptions a French household is going to get? 2.5, 3.5, 4, 5? It depends on the income, of course, and not everybody can do whatever they want. So there's a subscription to a major American platform that offers a lot of TV series. There's Canal Plus. There's platforms like M6 or Disney if you have children. And then if you have a newspaper, that means that you already have 4 or 5 subscriptions. So we fight for this, and we are fighting competitors who have a much better IT system, because is it also going through alliances? Maybe TF1 decided that they would make a partnership with Netflix. France Télévisions decided to also make a partnership with Amazon Prime. So are they competitors or are they opponents? Well, the platforms that we create could be an alliance. We want to do alliances. In the press sector, and I'm going to say it very quickly, union is a fight. As we said in the 70s, we really need to fight every day to be together, because there's so many different traditions and families and subgroups. In the fight of the 3 neighbors, there's a bit of a legal, a cryptic fight, which was providing publishers with an income. It's a union of press that there's of course a few lone wolves who want to do their own thing, on their side, but we managed to have 300 titles signed for, among which many regional newspapers. How would we have been able to negotiate that with major platforms that have many people in it? So the pooling of the skills allowed us to have a result. It all started with litigation. We brought us 800 million to the state. That has a hugely creative use. Part of it is escaping us, part of it is getting back to us. But we may have obtain that all the fines that the state won will be earmarked to a particular account to feed some subsidies to the press. But we're really united, and we're trying to be creative and coming up with solutions and innovations, because we believe in what we're doing. Thank you, Pierre. I feel like you're talking about the bad, well, the fact that the public authorities don't take into account your economic concerns. What about the word disinformation? TIDAR, you see all the politicians in the world, the heads of states, even in France. Do you feel like they're really taking into account properly this disinformation topic? And do you think they're fighting enough against it? The answer is yes and no. You need to develop. Yes, they're more and more aware that war is being waged by other means. Disinformation is a tool to wage war against countries. And we see what's happening in Georgia. In Georgia, Russia has managed to obtain what they wanted to obtain in Ukraine without having men on the ground. And they're doing this thanks to disinformation, electoral fraud. So they spend much less money and much less soldiers, and they achieve the same result, which means that Georgia is being completely falling under Russian sovereignty. And a lot of European leaders understand that this solution. Have we deployed enough resources to fight against that? I don't think so, because we can see the awareness, and we saw it last week at NATO, the reaction of European leaders. But we need to deploy other weapons, and one of them is to fight against disinformation. That's what we're trying to do within the fund, to finance independent media that, in the war of narratives, they counter the Russian narrative and they try to promote local narratives. I would like to add something to what Pierre said. The key is in the European, in the world, in the rich world, and in the global south, is to find a way to attract the young people, because they don't vote, but they also don't consume any media. I teach geopolitical in a university in Paris, and I ask my question all the time to my students, how do you get your information? And it's either TikTok or Instagram. It's the same young people who decide not to go to vote. And we watched the same trend in Romania. The younger you were in Romania, the more likely you were to vote for the extreme right candidate, which was the equivalent of Trump. And the older you were, the less likelihood there was that you would be voting for the extreme right candidate. So I think awareness goes both ways. You cannot just rearm Europe without thinking about rearming ourselves against disinformation. Thank you, Tidar. Stanislas, the state is calling on you for disinformation campaigns as well, right? We back 60 prevention campaigns in France to accelerate vaccination, screening, compliance to treatment, therapeutic compliance. And I've said it when I gave information on the health sector. There are two wars that we need to win. The first one is a technological war. And you said it. We have 1,000 engineers, and you have probably 100. But the state has 30,000, Meta has 30, Google has 60,000. So of course, there's a technological battle that we need to win as a group in the information war and in other sides of the economy. The second war that we need to win is the war of usage. How do you make sure that we take over the usage again, the behaviors of consumers? When I created Doctolib at the beginning, I thought, well, I'm going to help the doctors. I'm going to give them superpowers, and I was joined by so many doctors, sorry. And then eventually the patients joined and signed up, and I realized that what was happening is what's happening in the media universe is that ChatGPT is going to replace the doctor. Google is going to replace the doctor. So gradually, I felt like, no, I'm not going to let this happen, because one, I believe in French doctors. B, I believe in the medical truth, and I believe in a model that is different. So I decided to invest in AI, in information on health, because we're really helping the French people to understand their health better. So let's fight, not to make sure that nobody takes over, that ChatGPT and Google don't take over. So do I accept that the patients are getting trained on Instagram and TikTok? No, but I'm not naive, and I know they do. So there's a technological war on behaviors that we need to fight, and we need to work hand in hand with public authorities to work in all the sectors that make our society, that compose our society and make who we are. And we should be joining in this war because it's far from being over. They have, in 50 years, won part of the war, but the next 50 years we can still wage this war. But we need to work together as a group, public authorities, private actors, to do that. Thank you, Stanislas. Melissa? In your journalistic practice, we talked about the younger ones. Have you changed your narrative? Are you making TikTok now? Yes, yes. We're trying to attract the younger audience, going through platforms such as TikTok and Insta. But I want to insist on what we said. Everything that we talk about accelerated after the second mandate of Donald Trump. You were talking about all these channels, these local media, regional media that was backed before by public American funds that were cut from one day to the next. And that's really for ideological reasons, because the real information goes hand in hand with democracy. And in places where we lose the journalist work, a media that is working efficiently, that leads us to autocracy and war as well, sometimes. So if we cut the fact that America cut some of those local newspaper, and America and PBS was backing in the world some media and journalists that was working in difficult conditions, and now they're on their own. So you talked about AI. Elon Musk is checking with his teams if he can change his AI, Grok, to make sure that it would think like him, not in a way based on facts and data, but just based on the way he thinks. So this new American administration, everything that we talked about, has amplified it. They have amplified it with the actions of the new administration, the powers that they give to new platforms, the fact that Mercer is stopping their fact checks. Before it was a job, but now it's a war. And you're right. It is. I tell you, our work remains the same, which is to go grab the information, to go shoot whatever's happening on the ground, to try and understand what happened, and then to relay it to people. It's the way we're relaying to people that is different. When TikTok, we have formats where we can maybe explain more, bring more transparency to show you also how we worked, and it's the black box, isn't it? To make people trust us. Our brand was probably enough for the generation that still watches TV, but it has to be changing with this new generation. So today we're hostages. We were king of the cable 20 or 30 years ago. Now we're being held hostage by those platforms and by the platforms of the American tech sector. Thank you very much. I don't know at this stage of the debate there are people who want to ask questions. I think there's a mic floating in the room. Can you please introduce yourself in one sentence and ask a very quick and short question? Thank you. Guylaine Alajoigny, I'm an administrator at the newspaper Le Monde. Les Échos broadcasted telemedicine during COVID. I'm the one who invented satellite telemedicine, which is to make the data travel rather to make the patients travel. So my question is for Stanislas, but we created a ethics committee, deontology committee at Le Monde. Do you have one as well? And second question, if we talk about disinformation, de Maron, when we asked him what are the major dangers of the world in '93, he would reply, disinformation, disinformation, disinformation. So we need to restore the right, and why not an international court against disinformation? Thank you for your question. Of course, I completely agree to your second point, particularly on the health topic. On the first one, we have a committee, ethics committee, medical committee, scientific committees. We have a committee with a mission, with access to care and health. We're the first technology to co-construct with doctors and petitions. And we have 200,000 doctors who build it with us every day. So it's part of the reason why Doctolib works so well and is so popular. And I'm talking only about my sector, but I really believe in the fact of building something with the doctors or the actors of a particular sector. And it's one of the keys. If we want to win the war of usage, we need some great technologies and we need to focus on people. It may seem a bit simple to say that, but we really need to focus on patients, or in my universe, or on people in other universe. How do we make the life of these patients better? And if you don't build something with the doctors, you can't do it. Pierre, you want to say a word? Yes. In terms of les écoles Parisien, 2 years ago we released, before anybody else, an ethics committee, a charter, sorry, for the usage. And it was a very great momentum, because we have many user cases at the Parisien, and we set right away the idea that every time we need to release something, it has to be checked by a journalist. Because we know that the fact that to adopt new technologies is sometimes difficult, some people have concerns, so that was a great step forward. And in terms of ethics, it's up to, we have over 700 journalists in the group. They all have to comply to an ethics and to check the information and not be influenced by their own private life. So what is really important is to set a rule on how we function. There was a very important thing to say about disinformation. At some point, the site of Le Parisien was used by interests that we're not going to quote here, but all of a sudden, we were becoming very anti-Ukrainian. So there was something like a very active disinformation. The media should also learn how to develop the education to media in high school. It sounds obvious. Sometimes there's no... for 1 hour of class, to teach them about it, to teach them about the cognitive bias, to teach them how can people use the disinformation techniques. We need to train them. It was one of the proposals of the General States, and we have a time for a last question. Hello, thank you. My name is Robin Douche. I am a student in political science in Grenoble. Want to be a journalist. My question is mostly like we are a few days from a bill of law that was refused, that is going to go to commission on the merge of France Television to reduce the cost again and always. And us young people and everywhere in the country, we use a lot of media of France Television and Radio France. We're very attached to them. Like any other media, by the way. I would like to... I also listen to all of you on stage, Radio Classique as well, RTL and all that. But I really want to keep a public service, and I want to still be able to have a public service in my country. And Doctolib is the same, to know that it's not a state initiative, that the state was not involved to create this initiative. And in every other sectors, dozens of different sites where they don't talk to each other because they're far away. The information is getting lost, and I feel that the state is not fighting for it and not training or teaching enough. on journalism to the audience at large. So I'd like to have your opinion. It's going to be difficult to get everybody's opinion because we're running out of time and we don't have a state representative. But David will answer. I'm sure I can start. And I felt a bias in your question. You talked about cost cutting. I don't think it was ever part of the project. So I think it's important, if you want to be a journalist, to take each issue in a very neutral way. And I wanted to say that we bought RTL, and we have François with us every morning to talk about economics. Thanks to the M6 group, RTL is doing great. We're investing in programs, we're investing in journalists and anchors. We have the resources to do that. If we hadn't merged and if we hadn't joined forces, we would not be in the same situation. So I think it's a very French conversation. It's completely absurd to have two financial departments, and it would be very logical to have one public service that is strong and are grouped. I find this debate not necessary. I'm sorry if I'm a bit blunt. I'm sorry, we're going to have to stop. Thank you, both to the five of you. This session is over now. I'm going to give the floor to René Bandit and Frédéric Faroche and Pierre Ferracci, who are going to come to talk to us about ecological transition.